Welcome back to the Purpose Over Profit podcast. This week it's just Chris and I. We're diving into some of the resources we've consumed over 2021. We've looked back onto the books we've read, some of the films, TV shows we're looking at just now, or we've been watching over the last few weeks and months, and what podcasts are we listening to. There's some really great stuff in here. So we talk about everything from how do you influence people better, how do you live a longer life as well, how do you stop yourself from killing yourself basically, and I literally mean that, earlier in life. So yeah, there's some kind of deep subjects that we cover over the episode, but we also go from there to selling like cheap catty women, selling expensive houses in LA, Squid Game, and I guess what we're listening to from a podcast point of view as well. So hopefully you find it interesting, and listen in. Oh, welcome back to the podcast. This week it's just Chris and I. We thought kind of heading into Christmas wouldn't it be a good idea to, I guess, reflect on some of the stuff we've been consuming this year. So books, films, TV shows, podcasts, that type of thing. So yeah, a bit of a different episode from us this week, but thought it would be still of value. So how you doing, Chris?
I'm good, thank you, Darren. You've got a bit of a cold, so a bit more of a husky voice this week.
Husky voice. The listeners will love it, mate.
Bit of a husky voice after partying in Liverpool. So
yeah, how was it? So for anyone that doesn't know, Chris turned 40 this year, just a few weeks ago. How was Liverpool?
It's fantastic. So we stayed down at the Royal Albert Docks, and it's a lovely bit actually. So you get there as the Christmas lights are on. It's a complete straight walkway up to the shops. The shops are fantastic. If you live in Glasgow, imagine Glasgow Fort, but times 4, and actually quite trending, quite nice. And actually, there was so many pubs and clubs. It was just tremendous. Plus, went to a Liverpool game. Got to experience that as well, and that was tremendous. My wife came along, and she absolutely hates football, but she seemed to enjoy it as well. If not for the game, but the banter, as you call it. And there was a good bit of sing-song and a good bit of a laugh. So, not tremendous.
Good stuff. I was going to say we maybe should have had that chat off camera, but we're just straight into it. But cool. So do you want to kick off then with books? What books have you been reading, or audio books, actual books? What have you been reading at the moment or over the last year?
Yeah, I mean, actually, there's one we'll come on to later on, but I mean, one big one that I found this year was actually recommended through a client of mine called Capitalism, which I picked up, which is fantastic. So it's from the founder of Whole Foods. So for anyone who doesn't know Whole Foods are a company Whole Foods are basically a company that started up a shop, and they wanted to bring you quality fresh produce that was mostly organic, and they wanted to make sure that anyone they worked with, whether or not it was an employee or it was a supplier, they were treated fairly. So kind of before the fair trade kind of stuff came in, they wanted to make sure everyone was paid a fair wage. It made you pay a bit of a premium for your goods as well. And it's leap years ahead of where we are now, where way back then they'd have, like, say if you're going to go and buy, say, don't know, cashew nuts or some kind of nuts, they'd have the big dispenser there. You take your own container, you'd fill it up. And this is going back 15, 20 years ago before it's big now. So they've kind of been ahead of that curve as well. So it's a massive book for me because it talks about how to run a conscious business as well. So it's all about looking after your employees, looking after your suppliers. But it's also looking at, well, how can your business make a difference in the world as well, and what can that do? So even small things it does. So if you think about Vitality Health is kind of picked up this idea where Vitality Health will reward you for the health you'll get. So it might reward you for your gym membership or anything else. But what Whole Foods did way back when is they said, right, okay, if you want to cut down your smoking, if you want support on your diet, if you want to do this, then yeah, follow up. We work with you on your plan, and we will reward you, and we'll give you either extra pay, extra days off, extra incentives, all this benefit to help you as an individual. And even stuff that happens in the community. It talks about when it was first founded. There was a massive storm, can't remember which one it was, the whole town was flooded. The store was pretty much running in red because it was near enough bankrupt. They didn't have supply or anything like that. But what the community did is they came together and he actually works the community to get the shop back up because he believes in what it could do, because what it was trying to do for the community, because what it was trying to do for the staff. And then from then it's just grew. So that's a great book to read, Conscious Capitalism, if you haven't read it, because it talks about the principles of running a business for more than just making money. It gives you some key pointers, it gives you examples. It even talks about how it's held its hand up at times where there's been people out there that said, okay, you're seeing your business is doing this, but we've investigated and it's not doing this. So when they're challenged, they'll listen to them, they'll fix it. So yeah, it's a great book for any business out there that's looking to actually have a bit of a legacy that's going to last longer than maybe a couple of years of starting that growth. It's having that kind of a long legacy, as Martin Neumeyer talks about, the kind of the paper legacy. You're there for a long time.
Yeah. No, that sounds really good. Like bang on in terms of brand for the purpose over profit as well for the podcast. Like very much conscious capitalism, like doing business the right way, focusing on the passion and impact from a positive perspective that you can have. And yes, you want to make money from it and look after people and pay salaries and wages, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, like doing good, doing some form of good in the world. That sounds great. So who wrote that, mate? Conscious Capitalism.
Yeah, so that's by the actual person. It's the two founders. One's called John McKee, another one is Raj Sisuda. I might not have got his name right there. But yeah, I'm going to reach out to them and see if they want to come on the podcast, because obviously I work in brand strategy and design, and there's so much learning points that I've picked up from this as well.
These are the Whole Foods guys, are they?
These are the Whole Foods guy. Yeah, I mean, like any large organisation, the kind of downside is that there used to be a lot of Whole Foods where I live as well. Mm-hmm. But what's happened is Amazon actually purchased a couple of the Whole Foods in Scotland because they wanted to do Amazon Go, Amazon Fresh. Because of that, they wanted to kind of try and take out the competition. So there is an opportunity. There is part of it where you're like, this is a fantastic book, but there's another part of it thinking, well, they've just sold out part of their business to Amazon. But it depends on, this is commercial opportunities as well. So it's not making enough money in certain areas, then they probably look at what stores they have to close. So it'd be really interesting at one point to try and get the founders on the podcast and chat to them about that and understand their struggles as well.
Cool. Sounds good.
So what about your book? What about you? That was probably my first book in the year.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely been reading. I've been listening to more audiobooks this year. I read a lot of coaching books, but probably the one that's influenced me most this year, and I've got one that's called Influence actually coming up, but The Daily Stoic. So I started reading that. Probably I got that at the tail end of last year. But I would say it's an ever-present. I have it sat in here because I sit down to work, and before I sit down to work, I look at it. It sits on my in tray, and then I pick it up, and it's like, so for those that haven't seen it, we've talked about it on the podcast before. I write about it in my emails, but it's like a page a day. So you don't need a bookmark, and it doesn't need to feel overwhelming. But Stoicism, I guess, is a philosophy that goes back hundreds, thousands of years, I guess, in terms of what is maybe misrepresented as a philosophy. People like Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius are famous Stoics. And we kind of think of Stoicism and being Stoic as like pretty boring, like hard-nosed, stony-faced. And actually, it's really nothing about that. It's about staying grounded and level and being rational as much as possible in the moment. So, like how the main things I take from it are, well, usually there's a lesson every day. So usually you do read no more than one day. So let me read today's, December the 1st, right? Pretend today is the day. Let us prepare our mind as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time. That's Seneca. So he's another one. So Seneca, Epictetus, and yeah, Marcus Aurelius. They're kind of heavily featured in it. But that type of stuff, what he does is, Ryan Holiday, the author, kind of goes into it. So he reads that out, but sometimes when I read that out, I'm like, I need a little bit of help, so, like from the author to help me decipher what it means. So he goes into that.
It sounds a little bit preachy, doesn't it, to a point when you first hear it?
It does. I mean, so like Ryan Holiday, the author of it, goes in and he kind of breaks down every single quote. He gives his some context behind it and kind of brings it up to date. So he's like, live each day as if it were your life, whether it was your last. It's a cliche. He just calls it out. He's like, plenty say it, but few actually do it. And is that actually reasonable? But he's like, a better analogy would be like a soldier about to leave on deployment, not knowing whether they'll return or not. What do they do? Like, get your affairs in order. Like, I hear the phrase like own your shit from a guy I follow in property. Like, don't push something off until tomorrow. If you can handle something today, you should handle it today because it will make tomorrow better. So that's what he's kind of picking up from that. It's not like live each day as your last, like, right, let's go and like tick off my bucket list today, because it's not that reasonable. But actually bringing that to our present day, it's like, what's most important for us? What will make the biggest impact for us in terms of what do we want to do, or the impact we want to create? Like, do that today if we can. Like, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. Don't wait and push something out for tomorrow that can be done today. So, there's tons of stuff in that book, from like, how do you cope with kind of bereavement? How do you manage success and failure? How do you look at kind of comparison with others? Like, the Stoics is just so far ahead. I actually don't subscribe. You'll know this. I'm not religious. I don't kind of practice any sort of particular faith, but what I really do like is the principles of Stoicism, which kind of overlap with some of the bits of like Christianity or Buddhism or whatever that I find actually really, really good. So for me, that's my like Bible. I kind of feel like blasphemous for saying it, but that's kind of pretty much a Bible for me. That
well, if that's your religion, then it's not really blasphemous, if you like.
Yeah, it can't be blasphemous. I just don't give a shit. But yeah, it's like, well, how do I want to live my life? And like, I think a lot of people could do a lot worse than kind of open that and flick through it and see if Stoicism is for you. There's lots of other books out there around Stoicism, but I just find that it's just really easily consumable and is enough for me to keep me grounded. And it's crazy how I can be thinking about, I've got a certain challenge in my life, and then I open up the book the next day and there's some sort of quote or reflection that goes, shit, actually that's exactly right. And that helps me in the moment. So yeah, Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday, highly recommend.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I mean, I'm a follower and advocate of that after you posted a while back. I've actually slightly got out of the routine since I've actually been away, but what I'd say is I bought a kind of, there's a triple one that you did actually, and you can see it here. It's called the Daily Stoic Journal.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. So what it does is, like you said, you basically read the chapter, and then in this one here, which I'm holding up just to the camera, it breaks it down into the day. It can be morning and evening. So what I did originally was I'd put morning and evening reflection. And it basically says something like, I've lost my freedom. If I lost my freedom, what would break me? And that will be relative to the chapter you just read. And it'll give you a bit of a tip and teach the months that's coming as well. So what I started to do at the very start was do morning and evening. But then I decided what I'm going to do is use it for 2 years. So I put morning in, and then next year I'll do the evening one, so I can just kind of reflect as well. So I found that really good, and that's a journal. So that helps you then probably, because obviously you're processing in your brain, you're thinking about a solution, you might actually put it down. But I think both Darren and I journal. I haven't journaled for about 2 weeks now. But I don't know about you, Darren, you journal, don't you?
Yeah, I'm a bit patchy with it. I was going to say, I don't think I journaled until I couldn't find my journal. I found it last week. Where is it? Actually, it's back. It's in my entry now to focus on me actually doing it, because like, I'm a big believer of like managing your environment. Like, if you've got something left out, I know I use joke sometimes, but if I've got my own office now, so yeah, having something left out, then I'm more likely to do it. But yeah, I haven't journaled since, I think it was like 5-6 months ago, and I found it last week, and then I was just updating it last week. So
yeah, that's what I'd say. Journaling, even this, it's like probably 6 or 7 lines you can put in the Daily Stoic Journal. And I found that really good because it helps you reflect on what you've just read. And actually, the way the questions prompt you, it's a slightly different mindset, which is really good. And I found that really useful. And just quickly moving on, I was given this as a gift the other day, which I found fantastic. So this actually, hold up the camera, it looks like a Bible.
It does.
It's small, it's about A6 size. It's called Q&A a day, 365 questions, 5 years, 1,825 answers. It's called a 5-year journal. So I only got this other day as a present, and it says you can start at any point, but I'm going to start at the start of the year. And the idea is, hold up to the camera, each page is 5 sections. It's really simple. Ask your question at the top, and you've got to date it. So each one of them is for a year. So the first one's going to be for me 2022, next one 23, next one 24, next one 25, and 26. So it's a 5-year little mini journal. And you'll just put, again, there's only 3 lines of copy or 4 lines in there, and you just put, what is your mission today? The next one will be different question, and you keep this for 5 years.
So the first one is like, what's your mission today? What other questions? Give us a feel for what the questions are.
So 1st of January, what is your mission? So for 2023 or 2022, I'll put in what my mission is for that year. Next year I'll do the same. On January 2nd, can people change? And you've got to answer that. January 3rd, what are you reading right now? So it's just again, and then January 6th, today was tough because. So it just helps you kind of illustrate these kind of thinkings and what you think of at that time. And you can look back on it in a year's time and write what you feel then, and you can see how you've evolved as you go. Because this is all about, it talks around the goal idea that if you don't write a goal down, it's never going to happen. And it's actually being present in the moment as well. So I found this really useful. It was given to me as a gift, and the size of it, the look of it, I just love how it's designed as well. It's got this kind of lovely Bible idea, and it's such a small thing you can take with you. The problem I find with most journals, they're only big journals. Because you're trying to put a lot of content in. I found this is quite a nice snapshot. But I guess what I've got to be conscious of is what you kind of mentioned there, is you've got to be careful about how many things you're trying to put an entry into. So whether or not it's the Daily Stoic Journal, this little journal, and a journal, it can become too much at times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to manage that as best you can. Yeah, and I would say, like, journaling in general, like, find what works for you. Like, it could just be a couple of lines. Like, that Q&A book could be perfect for you, because there's more thinking than there does. Like, you have to be concise because it's only giving you 4 lines of text. So you need to probably think through how you can best capture it, which kind of forces your brain to work a little bit harder. Cool. Back to me, is it?
Yeah, go back to you, yeah.
I've got a few, but I think the next one I probably want to pick up is lifespan, because it's probably changed a little bit about how I forget who the author is now. That's terrible. Give me 2 seconds. But lifespan is effectively it's David Sinclair. So it's Dr. David Sinclair. This is a guy who believes that we should be living till 150. He thinks that's perfectly and beyond. That when we age, what's happening is we've kind of accepted that we have to age and die, that there's nothing we can do about it, right? But actually, our body regenerates. Like, say we cut ourselves, our skin heals itself, and like, you would never know, depending on the size of the cut, you would never know the difference. What's happening there is there's like certain chemicals, stuff that's going on in the body. It's like NDAs, and I can't remember the name of them, but we effectively lose more of them as we get older. And the problem is he treats an analogy like, let's say an airline pilot that's called away as a missionary or to go and help in Haiti when there's been an earthquake or disaster or something like that. He's like, they're no longer doing their job, the airline pilot, but he's now over helping in this area. And what happens is when he's not at his station doing what he should be doing, then that's what causes the breakdown in aging within ourselves. So and it compounds, because you think about it, when we start getting older, there's more like risk of things happening to us. All right. So, picking up infections, cancer, we've got COVID and stuff like that. And all the time when that happens, there's a flood of like antibodies and whatever else going to treat this. And meanwhile, back at base camp, that causes aging. And it's just, that's a recurring process. But he's like, well, what about if you could reset that? So he talks about stuff like, I guess, nootropics, like using things like, we'll come on to it, but like fungi, certain mushrooms, not the magic variety, but yeah, certain mushrooms in terms of like supporting you. Resveratrol, which is found in red wine. Obviously, you need to drink copious amounts of red wine to get the actual benefit.
Be careful what advice you're giving out here, Darren.
What's that?
You've got to be careful what kind of advice you're giving out here. Mushrooms, red wine.
I know. I mean, don't take this as advice in any way, but like I've certainly looked at it. Resveratrol you can buy online. It's like completely healthy, but it's as a regenerative benefits. NDAs, which I can't remember what they stand for, but we'll look to put it in the show notes. Effectively, we lose them as we age. So that's what he's challenging. So you can get like NDA boosters. Guys like Joe Rogan, like big advocate of that. When he's not been vaccinated, when he got COVID, he was like taking NDA boosters. Like he was the way it was portrayed, it was like horse tranquilizers and stuff like this, but it's actually bullshit. It's just because it's a drug that's used on both humans and animals. Like, so let's just focus on the animal context. But yeah, so NDAs, you can take NDA boosters to kind of, as you age, you can kind of offset some of that imbalance within your body because of you can't kind of reproduce those NDAs. Do you know what I mean? Because when you're aging, that's something which is affected. So you're artificially kind of increasing your ability to not only live longer, but have a healthier lifespan.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, people are like, do you want to live to 100? Nah, just take me out the back and shoot me. And it's like, when people think that, it's because they see themselves as this crippled, like slow, they can't think, they're shitting their pants and like all of this stuff. And you're like, no, do you know what? When life gets like that, it's just time for me to go. But he's like, look, it's not just about prolonging life, like you breathing and being here. Like you want to increase your lifespan, your ability to have energy and have a fulfilled life. So, I mean, he reckoned whether, you know, regardless of his work or whatever, there's so much weight behind this. If you think about the development of like genetic engineering, you know, biocoding, and like it's inevitable almost that the pharmaceutical companies or medicine, like big business, is going to be getting into that at some way, shape, or form. And unfortunately, like the moral aspect of it is that you'll probably see a greater divide in the not only the length but the healthiness of poor and rich people, because the rich are going to be able to afford these NDA boosters and whatever kind of treatments come along to help not only extend life but create like a richer life later, and the poor just simply can't, or you know won't be able to afford it. So I think there's some dangerous moral challenges to what it is that he's going on about. But it's probably the book that's changed my outlook most about, right, what could I be doing now in my daily life, like as well as exercising, reading, keeping the brain active, what sort of supplementation could I be doing to just be smart and look to manage that. One of the other things, it's like he'll take an aspirin, half a gram or something like that, aspirin a day for blood thinning principles. He doesn't think he's going to have a heart attack. But obviously the likelihood of that kind of happening as you get older is there. So he's kind of not waiting until you've had a heart scare and then looking to get put on that. It's like, how can you be preemptive and take responsibility now?
That's what's good. So he sounds like he's actually preempting a lot of this, which is fantastic. I was just wondering as well. So obviously you've got this chap who's written this book, and he's talked around obviously the divide between the poor and the rich, which is obviously it's unfortunate. It's been a very historical thing. You look at what is it, even simple stuff. Like I'm looking at my bins here. We talk about recycling. Recycling was first introduced for the rich. And recycling was a concept the rich involved, and then actually as it kind of time developed, it kind of got to the poorer states. Same with like astronauts flying to space and all this space travel. At one point, everyone will get to go, but it's just
it's the same with climate change. You talk about like the developed countries. There's a bigger responsibility on the richer nations contributing more towards kind of climate control and managing the planet. Developing countries recognise and look, they're in a bit more of a pinch, but yeah.
It'd be interesting to see, because obviously, like, my wife's a nurse, so she's all about studies and all this kind of stuff. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of studies and data is behind all this stuff to see what backs up. Because
well, like a lot of the stuff's done by rats, I'll be honest. So I mean, but this guy's a practice. He's a doctor. He's been practicing for the last 25, 30 years or something like that. But yeah, he's been able to show like increases in terms of like even curing things like blindness. All right, so stuff like where rats that had blindness and they were given, I think, was it resveratrol and an NDA boosters, they were able to, like, it's almost like resetting genes. So it wasn't even like healing, it was like resetting the genome, which I know sounds absolutely crazy, but it, like, all of us have been born with a certain DNA code that we can do nothing about. I kind of see it as 50-50 because that's just I'm not saying that's fact, but a lot of the stuff, like if you've got a history of like heart disease, mental illness, even cancers, like there's a good chance that that's going to impact you. There's a good chance. It's not 100%. It's not 0%. There's a chance. And therefore, like, there's some things that are out with your control. But if you were able to get to a place, and this is where he would say, like, where we've got all our devices, like, that we're tracking, we could track insulin with, I think I was hearing something the other day, like you could have something that's, I don't know, in your ear, like an earbud or something like that, and that could be measuring your pulse in your ear and be able to give feedback as to whether you need an insulin shot. Yeah. All right. So there's just loads of stuff like that I think will be the next wave of technology that will help us track our health. So if you were able to know all of these things and know your human code, I think he does that just now. Like, you could go as a private client and say, I don't know, a couple of £100, give me my genetic code. Tell me what's in my DNA. So he sees that's something which everyone should know and have on there, like almost like a passport, not in the way that Big Brother's watching you or whatever, but as this is your own health card. Like, you should know this stuff. And therefore, once you know it, then you can start to have a tailored health plan to manage best for you. So things like, if you've got heart disease, well, maybe take half a tablet of aspirin now, like even in your 20s, 30s, because you're evolving a habit that potentially might support you in later life. So I think that's stuff I'm really interested in, the whole how we could use wearables, because these are, let's be honest, these haven't moved forward, like the watches and stuff. They haven't moved forward in the last 5 years. No one's cracked it yet.
Well, I was going to just dive in there actually when you talk about wearables. I remember seeing it. I was at an event a few years back actually, there was somebody talking about GDPR and using permission-based content and how you can actually hear people. I was talking about the dilemma with Fitbit at that time. So Fitbit, because of their algorithms and because what they can track, they can tell whether or not maybe you are more prone to have a heart attack, you're not walking properly, your high blood pressure or anything like this. But what they can't do with that data is they can't supply that back to you, because what they're there to do is just register your health, and actually they're there as a kind of health and well-being benefit to you. That's all it is. It's not there as a medical recommendation, but they can take that algorithm and that quantity of people they've surveyed and say, okay, as a group, we can then see that, yes, you are more prone, given that we've surveyed the whole of the world. And with Fitbit data, we can see that you fall into this pool of one person that's maybe more susceptible to have diabetes or whatever. But then they couldn't at that time, I don't know if it's changed, go back to that person and say, by the way, our data is showing this, because that's not what they've signed up for. They signed up for them just to like kind of track what they're doing, their runs, jogs, whatever. It
feels like a relatively easy thing to solve. I'm assuming maybe I'm looking at it quite naive. Like, if you had a disclaimer or had these check boxes, opt in, opt out, like, are you comfortable with me providing feedback based upon healthcare statistics from the data that we capture from users across the world to help your health? Like, as an added value for a Fitbit, I would imagine, like, I would be ticking that box.
You would imagine, but then I guess you've got to look at it from the other side of the coin, from the business side, from Fitbit. What if they suggested somebody has a potential amount of diabetes and that they're already an anxious person, and all of a sudden that spirals out of control for them and something happens? So that's where, from that exactly, from a business point of view, where you want to add value.
Yeah.
But then I mean,
where there's blame, there's a claim, which is kind of like the sad reality of the world that we fucking moved into. Sorry, but yeah.
No, but that's when you're talking about that. That's why businesses, they can look at the extra value. I heard a call yesterday where somebody's talking about the baby grows at Tesco supply. In the baby grows now, they've got examples of how you can resuscitate a baby, because in baby grows, that's sometimes how they might either be, I don't know, they might lose a life while wearing the baby grow, but this is a bit of a guide. So that's companies to do the extra mile. So you can imagine Fitbit doing that. But just jumping back to your looking after yourself, looking after your life, one of the audiobooks I was listening to, I haven't finished, to be honest, it's quite a chunky book and it takes a bit of time, is Why We Sleep. We've both...
Yeah. David, what's his name?
Robertson, is it? We'll double check the author, but Robertson, but he talks about the health benefits about sleep, which seems so simple, but when you listen to it, it's quite scary. And he gives you statistical data he's used, and he shows you explains examples of them. So I've known my mum has actually worked night shift nearly her entire life. My mother-in-law passed away a good, I don't know how many years ago, was it 15 years ago, 10 years ago? She actually passed away of cancer, all this kind of stuff, work night shift. And the data he supplies is that if you regularly submit to night shift, your body cannot handle that. Your body is not used to that. You need that regular sleep. You need to understand when, even if you're locked in a dark room, you'll still understand when the sun's coming up. Your body clock will understand when the sun's coming up and actually when it's going down. So then your archaic rhythm will get into set and you'll go to sleep, which is perfect. So you need a standard of 8 hours sleep and your body needs that rest. And he's got all these studies about tracking people who did the night shift and people who didn't do the night shift. And there was a rise in like dementia, Alzheimer's, all these other horrible things that happen to you just because you don't get enough sleep. And he talks about how you need that 8 hours sleep, if not more. And he even talks about, he debunks myths around the power nap. So when I hear the power nap, I think, right, okay, I've not, like when Dan and I both have kids, we haven't had a good night's sleep because they've been up all night and you think, right, I'm going into work. Okay, I'm going to work, I'll do something. You might go into a meeting room, grab a wee half hour, get a shut eye, that's you, your power nap, that's you're sorted for the day. That has been misconstrued. The power nap isn't that at all. I think he talked about was astronauts going into space and how they needed that extra sleep. When do they bulk on that extra bit of sleep? Is it the start of an exercise or at the end to keep them more awake and alert? And I think it was they bolted it on at the end, so it was additional extra bit of sleep they got at the end. It wasn't a big gap they had and they did the power nap. It was an additional bolt on to give them that extra sleep. But they had some technical name and somebody in a boardroom went, that sounds a bit crap. Let's call it the power nap. And all of a sudden, this power nap has been used, and he gets furious at the fact that people think, okay, I'll have a power nap, and that'll sort me out. He even talks about the dangers of not having...
Hold on, sorry. So they were just so I understand it, they were carrying out, so astronauts, they were carrying out exercise in space, and it was like, what? They needed to have a sleep because their sleep pattern was interrupted because of...
I think it was astronaut. I'm trying to remember the exact example. It was on Earth at the time, and then what they had to do is they had to work extra long shifts to get their body ready. So anyone who's listened to this book, I've not listened to it for about 2 months, actually 3 months.
Matthew Walker, isn't it?
Matthew Walker, sorry. Somebody can jump in and correct me, but whoever it was needed an extra long bit of sleep. So they were trying to figure out, did they give them at the start or at the end? And then they did it at the end. And instead of giving it they gave it as a bolt-on, so additional bit of extra they gave them instead of a power nap, which people think that you can actually have a 6 hour sleep, then 4 hours later you'll have a half hour and that's you sorted. He also talks about the scary statistics about driving with not enough sleep as well, and all how you'll be asleep for a microsecond and how far you can travel and all the death rates and how it's actually worse than drink driving and all this kind of stuff you'd never imagine. But we're under... And he talks around as well, as we all know, about how people have different sleep routines and different patterns. So some people will be night owls and people will be, what are they called? Night owls and morning, I don't know.
Larks.
Was it larks? Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said that we try and shoehorn people into these categories when actually that's even more damaging for them as well. It brings up stress and anxiety. So just listening to you talk about, is it lifespan, did you say? Lifespan? Lifespan. So I'd say if you're going to read that book, then just add that Why We Sleep on top of that as well, so you get that full kind of 360 approach. One's all about what you put into your body and how you look after yourself. One's about actually getting the right sleep and why it's so beneficial. So I found that a fantastic book. It's quite a hard listen to at times because it's talking about why we sleep and statistics. So I'd probably recommend the book. I'm trying to go through the audiobook. I'm about halfway through.
But I've not read it, but I've listened to a few of his podcasts that he's done, and the quote that always stays with me, and I'm gonna butcher this, but it's like if sleep wasn't incredibly important to us, then it would be the biggest evolutionary mistake ever made. And the thing about evolution is it doesn't tend to make many mistakes. So if we didn't need to sleep like a third of the day, then like why would our body evolve over thousands of years in order for us to kind of like have that need as a refresh point? Because it doesn't, what we kind of see as, I think, and we've probably wound back a bit from this. Maybe I'm thinking differently around it, but this hustle culture of like 5 a.m. club, 3 hours sleep, late to bed, early to rise, chase the day, hustle, grind. It's bullshit. It's absolutely bullshit. And actually what you're doing is killing yourself. That, like, Matthew Walker's pretty clear on this. If you think that you're coping on 4 or 5 hours and you're okay, that's enough for you, it's not enough for you. There's like a fraction of a percent of people who can survive with that type as a special condition. Very, very, very rare. The likelihood is you're not that person, and what you're doing is killing yourself. So like I used to always be 5:30 or 5 o'clock. I used to get up, even if I hadn't got to sleep at 10. So I'm not even getting into what would be classed as deep sleep. You need to get into like REM sleep. You need 4 or 5 hours or something like that before you get into it. And usually the last half hour of your sleep is the most beneficial, or last hour. Certainly that last little chunk is the most beneficial. And it's crucial. As I said, like it would be the biggest mistake evolutionary, and evolution just doesn't make mistakes like that. So like,
just on that
sleep.
Yeah, just on that point, Dad, I mean, 2 points. One, you mentioned about the 4 hour to 5 hour sleep, and he gives 2 examples. He said if you look at probably the strongest leaders of his time to a point in politics, which is right or wrong, is Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher, who really got on by 4 hours or 5 hours sleep. And they both died of the same condition. I can't remember if it's dementia or Alzheimer's. And he says that's a running pattern, you see, with this kind of stuff, because he talks about, you mentioned it there, REM sleep, the importance of getting enough sleep, because you mentioned it around your body as well. So when you're sleeping, your body goes into different kind of states. And one of the most crucial states is, I can't remember if it's REM sleep, but it might have been REM sleep. And what happens during that period is your body starts to heal itself. And that's why people talk around you shouldn't really eat after 7 o'clock because your body, or 6 o'clock because 7 p.m, because your body needs to have digested that food. Because at night time, when your body's lying there sleeping, your body should have nothing in the stomach to process, because what it needs to do, it needs to send out all these little bits of your body, all these little dudes to go out and fix part of your body, whether it's a cut in your hand, like you mentioned, whether or not there's something wrong in your brain. And if you give it that,
yes, yeah, sure. I mean, your brain was the biggest thing that I picked up. It was like almost like a wash cycle for it, isn't it? It's, you can't see the waste products every point in time we're awake, right? See, when you exercise physically, the next day you get DOMS, the next couple of days you get delayed onset muscle soreness, right? That is your waste product. That is like lactic acid buildup. It's excreting from your muscles, and you feel it physically. We don't feel it in our brain. Sometimes we can be agitated or like anxious and stuff like that. But every day when we're talking just now, there's waste products. There's things, our brains are working, thinking about what I'm going to say next. What's my thought pattern? Where am I going? Where's this leading to? What's my next point for the podcast? And that's excreting waste products that are invisible to us. And we can't, most of the time, we can't see it. And you need to get into that deep sleep, as I understand it, to basically get rid of all that shit. Yeah. It's the unscientific way of maybe explaining it, but yeah.
Well, I think that's brilliant, because there's a Disney movie, it's Inside Out, where it's all these like numbskulls.
Yeah.
All the characters in your brain. There's a classic bit in that where you mentioned, where it kind of simplifies it, where it's like the brain, there's these little people cleaning up the old memories, getting rid of them because they're not required anymore. And you're right, that's what happens. There's these like kind of trash cans in your brain that you need to get rid of. If you don't, they just build up and build up and build up. And that's why I really liked his audiobook, because it builds up, it backs up with all the stats and says, okay, this is what happens. This is the people we've studied. These are the dangers you'll find. And it gives you across driving, your work life, your health, anything. I thought that was really interesting. So I'm halfway through. I want to finish it as well. But what I'd recommend is probably buying the book, because I'm quite I'll buy books and I'll just write in the margins and the notes what I think of them as well, anything that pops into my mind. And that's why I'll never sell books once I've got them, because they're absolutely vandalised with all my notes. But so that was my other one, Dad. So Why We Sleep. So I guess it's back to you then. Good
stuff. Right, we'll do one more.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So one, again, I'm in the middle of just now, but again, as inspired from a podcast that I heard of. It's an older book, but I think it's a really good book. If you think about, I think it's applicable for everyone as well. So it's called Influence. It's by another doctor, Robert Cialdini, and I think he's got 6 or 7 principles of how you can influence people. So, psychologist, I guess, he has a framework for how you can help influence others. So I'm going to call out a few of them just now, that some of his principles. So things like reciprocity. So if I give to you, it's a good way to influence you to give to me. So he kind of talks about, I know that quite sounds a bit contrived, but I think when it's done in the right way, and he talks about how the right way to do it and not the right way to do it, then you can kind of support influence. So if you're in a career, or you're a business owner, or even from a relationship point of view, so managing kids, partners, kind of supporting that, laws, he's got these 6 principles. So reciprocity is one. Social proof. How can people see what you're doing? So this is where social media kind of comes in. It's like testimonials. People will feel a lot more confident to buy and purchase and do the thing that you want them to do if they can see that others have done it. If they can see other people liking's another principle. So if they can see people that like you, or they can see a likeness in you, so you're similar to them. Scarcity is another one. If things are obviously, if we know if they're scarce, we think that we're going to need them. We're going to need to buy them. This is just general supply and demand. Look at what's happened with fuel and various other things after COVID. And then the last couple, authority and consistency. So authority is obviously like, who are you? We've been speaking about a few different concepts here, lifespan, and Matthew Walker, who's around Why We Sleep. But these guys are doctors. They've got a certain authority to be able to speak. They're experts in their field, and they've got scientific authority to back up what it is that their opinion is. They're not just like we Bob for down the street sort of thing, is what we've been seeing on social media. And then, consistency. I guess being able to see that you're there is what it says on the tin, but you're there quite consistent, kind of day in, day out, and you're not, a manic sort of personality that's kind of there for a couple of days and then away, you never see from you again, or you're spouting completely different philosophies at different ends of the spectrum from one week to the next. It's like having that consistency about who you are. But the whole premise is like, how do you want to create influence in your life? And I think it's a real big challenge that most of us have, to influence other people, for positive gain or not, actually, because I'm sure it could be misused and is misused. But all of us, I think, would like to influence people in some way in our life. So I think that's been the most comprehensive. The audiobook's like about 15 or 20 hours. It's like, it's a big old watch. And similar to what you just said about Matthew Walker, sometimes I'll order the podcast and halfway through I'm like, shit, I really needed this as a book, because I want to go and highlight stuff and kind of just check and kind of bookmark key things. And I'm usually listening to podcasts in the car or audiobooks in the car. So it's not always appropriate to bookmark stuff. No, I think that's an Influence by Robert Cialdini. It's Cialdini. Sorry, it's a good few years old, I think. Like,
because I'm listening to that and I've noted down each of those 6 points. I mean, obviously social proof, consistency, scale, all these kind of stuff. And I'm like, actually, these are kind of very similar to business principles as well. which is a brand, what you should be doing as well. I mean, scarcity is kind of one which I've kind of
Scarcity.
Scarcity even as one that I'm kind of wondering about how that would fit. But yeah, as business principles, this is everything you should be considering as a brand as well, because it's all about how you look and how you influence people. Because marketing's all about the push, but brand's all about the pull. It's how you pull people in, and that's what brand's all about as well. No, that's brilliant. Actually,
I think you'd love that in terms of like a lot of the stuff that you work on, influence. I think that would work like really well. And he goes really deep into each one, hence why it's such a long book. Like, so you spend like a good few hours on reciprocity and how can you use that to support influence and why that's important. And I'm trying to think what the main one. Scarcity, I think, is the kind of principal driver. There's like some that are more important than others, but I think reciprocity and scarcity potentially. But scarcity, I think, is we as a human psyche, we focus on, like, imagine when we were hunter-gatherers, we haven't evolved massively beyond a lot of that stuff. And therefore, see, when we're out there, we always think that, oh no, I don't want to miss out. It's this FOMO. I don't want to fear to miss out on something. So if we think that something's scarce, we naturally gravitate towards it. We naturally want it a little bit more than something that's in plentiful supply. Even if the value of them both to us in our own lives are exactly the same, we'll go to the one that's more scarce because there's a chance that we might miss that. That's quite an emotional kind of driver from that. But as I said, as a psychologist, I think he goes really deep on each of those, and it's very comprehensive from what I've heard.
I like how we're reading books where it's backed up by stats and doctors as well, who were heavily influenced by. And like you say, it's not Bob down the road. I wonder, because obviously we've got notes about other stuff we'd love to talk about. I wonder if we just get a quick snapshot instead of saving this off. Like, we can just have a bit of fun with this as well. So, what films have you liked this year, Daz, that you would?
So films,
film or series or whatever.
Yeah, I'll run through a few. But so I like films or TV shows. But Fantastic Fungi was one I've watched in the last month. All about mushrooms, and I've been doing a little bit of research into this. It's it started in Lifespan maybe about 9 months ago, and I've listened to a few different podcasts, done a bit of research into nootropics in general. So yeah, now I supplement every day with a kind of a mushroom blend of six different mushrooms.
Well, I've heard mushroom coffee. Rich Roll talks about mushroom coffee, doesn't he? It's supposed to be really good for you.
Rich Roll, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's a coffee, doesn't give you the crash as well. But yeah, I'll check that out. I mean, I was away recently, so I got to try the other kind of mushrooms for a while, just to experiment and have a bit of fun with, which was fantastic. What about series then? What about films? Was there any other films?
That is a film. I think it's Netflix. Ghostbusters. We were out in London a few weeks ago. See the new Ghostbusters film, but really, really good. Left with big massive smile on their face. Anyone around the same age that remembers the original film, there's just some really good quotes in it. I don't want to kind of spoil it for anyone, but there's plenty of nostalgia in there, and it's very, very good. Some other stuff.
I was going to say, my kids haven't seen the original Ghostbusters, but they loved it as well. They thought it was fantastic. So it can work across all ages. But you're right, but it does hark back to the past, which is great as well. On you go.
A couple other things. So there's just TV shows, but some of them's absolute garbage. So my guilty pleasure at the moment is Selling Sunset, which for anyone in property is it's a load of very attractive, bitchy women selling high-end exec houses in LA, basically. So we've been watching it for a few years, but the latest series is just out, and it's about 5% on selling property and about 95% of the bitching that goes on in the office and who's saying what to who. But you don't need to think too much about it.
I was going to say, that is an insight into you. You guys never imagined that. That's fantastic.
And then the last thing, everyone's probably, if you haven't heard of Squid Game and you haven't watched it, then you should probably give it a watch. I mean, there's some, as well as being just quite entertaining, I would say watch it with subtitles watch it with South Korean language, but have it with English subtitles. Because if you have it in English, honestly, it's actually farcical. We watched the first few, and it was almost painful to watch. And it's amazing how much of a difference.
I was going to say, because I've seen it, but I haven't seen it with the English dubbed over, because I can imagine you lose a lot of the passion and energy.
And it just doesn't match the expressions that people are using. So then you're like, the acting's terrible. This is exaggerated and whatnot. So yeah, I would go for that if you do watch it. But that was on Netflix. Basically, Squid Game is the premise of it is like there's a true message of the poor in the world and being motivated to gamble their life basically to get out of the financial position that they're in, and obviously the opulence of the people that run it, which is effectively betting on the game, which is people effectively killing themselves. So
it goes back to that rich and poor divide, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's me. I'm sure there was a ton more in there, but there was no other films that kind of went, oh, that was brilliant. Apart from that, it would be Disney ones that I'm probably calling to you, like Raya and Luca or something. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Actually, Luca was fantastic. But yeah, I mean, for me, the film was Ghostbusters. I watched that as well.
Oh man, I can't believe sorry, I'm saying that. Soul came out this year. Soul was a phenomenal. Was that last year?
I think that was last Christmas.
Was it? Oh well.
Yeah, that's good enough. Yeah.
Soul was a fantastic film. If you haven't seen Soul, it is a Disney film, like animated movie. But man, like again, I won't no spoilers in it. But just a fantastic movie, start to finish, talking about the meaning of life, purpose, just a lot of the stuff that I'm really passionate about. So.
Find your passion as well, definitely. That's what it was about. I loved it. But yeah, definitely watch that. Yeah, for me, it was Ghostbusters, definitely. Yep. Series-wise, so I don't really watch that much TV, but my wife influences me when we do, because she thinks this is fantastic. So, and she always picks
what influence principle does she use to influence you?
That is probably...
Scarcity?
It's just sheer consistency. She'll bang on about it forever, and I won't get a chance to...
Consistency, there we go.
Consistency, yeah. But no, so we watched, it was a second series of Dark. If you've not watched it, it's fantastic. I think it's in German. It's called Dark. It's on Netflix. It's a very obscure and bizarre program, and I can't really give you any of the tips about it because it gives away a lot of the storyline, but there's 2 series of it, and the first series is brilliant, but again, watch it in German. It's just quite bizarre, quite scary, quite unusual, just bizarre. And the second one, again, is needs subtitles. It's called Chestnut Man. This is based in Scandinavia, but it's a detective series about trying to figure out who did it, basically, and where did somebody disappear to. The same kind of idea across the 2, but again, it's totally random, totally hooks you, quite short series, but you absolutely love it, especially the subtitles, because I find as well, when you're watching movies or watching stuff, you're listening to it, you're not fully involved, but when you have the subtitles on, you're really concentrating as well. Because I've got kids, it's good because you can put the volume down. So for me, that's probably the biggest things. And I love to bake, so Bake Off for me this year has just been tremendous. Bake Off is always my kind of guilty pleasure.
Who was the winner, and what did they bake?
It was Giuseppe. I can't remember. He baked loads of stuff, but he's living in Milan now. He's writing a book with his dad. But he was brilliant. So was Chiggs. This guy Chiggs was on it as well. He hadn't really started baking until about a year and a half ago. And that was him. He was fantastic. And a couple other ones which are fantastic. But yeah, kids loved it as well. Kids are into it. And I love baking as well. So it's a good opportunity for the kids to get involved. So it's just tying it back. But yeah, for me, that's it. One book I'd recommend to everyone, just jumping back, because at the start of the year I read a book series called The Foundation Series, which is all about future travel and all this kind of stuff and living in different worlds. It's amazing because there's 6 or 8 books of them, and it's all.
Is it by?
What's that?
Is it by? Is it one author or?
Yeah, it's Walter Asimov. Is it Asimov? Isaac Asimov.
Well, Isaac Asimov.
So there's a movie done a lot of years ago called I, Robot. They basically kind of done a couple. It's kind of on that kind of. Yeah, that kind of premises. But I'd recommend that series of books because it's just coming out on Apple TV just now. They've just done done the launch of the first series. So they've just had to read the books first. It's tremendous. If you really want something to kind of dip into over the new year and just let your brain relax, I'd recommend that.
Cool. Good stuff. Do we want to finish off on some podcast recommendations?
Yeah, go for it. I've got a couple.
On you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm still a massive fan of mine. I'm quite design led as well, so I'm a fan of Masters of Scale. This isn't design led. This is Hoffman, Reid Hoffman, who was the founder of LinkedIn. Masters of Scale brings on different guests. He's fantastic. I think he had the BAM on recently, so I need to go back and listen to it. But that's always one you can dip your toe into, and it's just tremendous. I found it fantastic. Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, my wife influenced me on this as well, which is consistency. Again, he's just a great guest on. It's mostly book launches he'll come on for, but it's about an hour and a half, and it will just talk about talkable things. We listened to one in the car journey up, where it was a doctor talking about how you don't really fully listen to your children because you'll be asking them stuff, and they'll be so involved because they've got they call it the torchlight, where they're so focused on something and you think they're ignoring you, but actually they're just so involved in a task that they can't see past it. It's like when you talk about soul, you're so involved in something that you don't understand it, and you sometimes got to go down to their level and talk to them, and sometimes take a step back and use your flashlight to understand what else is out there. So really interesting stuff. So probably for me, that's just a quick couple of two. I've got loads of other ones, which is the Two Bobs, which is a creative one, which is about just about these fantastic creatives demystifying what the business world is out there and the brand world, and it's actually making it a bit easier for people who are solo entrepreneurs to kind of catch up. What about you? There's three from me. What about your?
No, I can't believe that we've not had overlap on podcasts. But yeah, I mean, my number one, I'm pretty much weekly regular, is Modern Wisdom, which is by a guy, Chris Williamson, former. What's the word I'm looking for? He was on the first. What's the Love Island thing? Yeah, you can tell I've watched it, but anyway. His podcast has exploded over COVID. He does like 3 episodes a week, and he just has interesting conversations. So very much up my street. If you're interested in just different concepts, it's like he could be talking about like gang culture in South America one week, and then talking about existential risk, to talking about productivity the next week. So there's just so much stuff in there. Love that. Property Hub is a staple. If anyone's listening to this and is in property and doesn't listen to the Property Hub, the two Robs, you had the two Bobs in media, but this is the Property Hub ran by the two Robs, and yeah, they've had a podcast running for I think about 10 years. They just give so much advice. I think they're Manchester, Liverpool sort of based, but yeah, very, very good. Joe Rogan, if you listen to podcasts, don't know who Joe Rogan is, you probably don't need that, but it's something actually I've came late to the party and I dip in and out of that and just find who he's talking to that's interesting. I love Joe Rogan's style.
They can be quite intense at times because his style's quite like that.
But do you know what I love about long conversations? Sometimes they'll be like over a couple hours long. And he sits and he'll have a drink and a smoke, and you really get into just interesting conversations. That way, there's no hiding. You really get a feel for his guests. So he's got a great knack for being able to put his guests at ease and elicit the information that we all want from them. So I really love that. I don't listen to it every week in, week out, but yeah, if you scroll through that, there's just some really. He's had that Matthew Walker on. That was probably the episode that exploded Matthew Walker to the masses. And then finally, School of Greatness, which Lewis Howe, I think his name is. So again, I dip in and out of that. I love his podcast. He's like very big on positivity, personal development, and whatnot. He brings like fantastic guests on week in, week out. And yeah, he's had a podcast running again for about 10 years or something like that. It's crazy the amount of episodes. He's well into the thousands anyway of episodes that he's done. But yeah, School of Greatness, Lewis House as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic. There's a couple on there that I've listened to as well, and I find it really interesting you mentioned that dip in and out. I think that's a massive thing. I find that with a lot of the content, I've had a bit of a break for probably 2 months of content, and I've just coming back to it now. I think you just get to a point where you just consume so much, you need to sometimes have
Yeah, and you need to have a bit of space to absorb what it is that you listen to or what you read. And you can't do that if you're just constantly on the next audiobook or you're on the next podcast. And yeah, you need to have a bit of both. So yeah, I would say with any of this stuff, like dip in, like even like so the books that we were talking about, there's some kind of quite meaty elements in there, like sleep, like protect your sleep. Like there's probably it's something that's applicable to absolutely everyone. If you think that you're like, I'm struggling with my sleep just now, don't just try and battle through it. Like you need to, you've got a responsibility to find like what works for you, because the science is really clear on this. Like if you're not getting a solid, I think minimum 7 hours, but you're killing yourself. You're going to give yourself a much higher likelihood of early onset degenerative brain disease, Alzheimer's, etc., dementia, like all of that stuff. Like don't just like, but I feel fine now. Yeah, that's such a stupid way to think. And don't take it from us. Go and look into the science and dig into it if you don't believe us. Like hopefully this inspired you. Similarly with lifespan, don't just take my word for it and start ordering cases of red wine and thinking that's gonna do you. Go out there and kind of sense check the science. Resveratrol, NDA boosters, aspirin, whatever else. I think go and check it out. And hopefully this has been an interesting episode. It's been good to kind of sit and reflect on a lot of this stuff, but it's always good to get new inspiration on new books and stuff like that, and even the TV shows like Dark and the Chestnut Man. I think I'll go away and have a look into them in my downtime over Christmas.
That's definitely a Friday night where you're consuming your red wine and your mushrooms to make you feel better. So
yeah, just to reiterate, they're not magic mushrooms. They're a nootropic blend. But yeah. Cool. Right. Thanks, Chris. Christmas in a couple of weeks.
Yep, so we'll have a Christmas episode out at some point as well.
Yeah, we should do. We'll have a Christmas episode out. We'll do that next week, yeah?
Perfect. Right, guys.
All right, until then.
As always, thank you so much for listening to the Pop Pod this week. If you'd like to leave a review or share the podcast with others, then that'd be awesome. You'll find us on Instagram at the Pop Pod, and on Facebook we have a community group called Purpose to Progress that anyone can join. And we'll be back every Monday with a new episode, but until then, stay on purpose and we'll see you next week.